We are about to embark on an immersive journey through the corridors of our minds. Stand by as we prepare for departure.
Welcome aboard, everyone, to the Productivity with Peace of Mind podcast adventure. Our journey will begin in just a moment. Inhale deeply and exhale. Our voyage takes us on a captivating tour, diving deep into the intricate layers of our thoughts and imagination. Brace yourselves for the complexities of our evolution. For a safe and enjoyable journey, stay seated, secure your helmet and protective goggles, and keep hands, feet, and legs inside while the ride is moving. Now relax and enjoy.
What if I told you that healing from chronic pain or chronic symptoms or any kind of chronic conditions or illnesses isn't actually a one size fits all journey? But instead, it's kind of like building your own pie. We talk about this pie analogy in this episode, which is kind of funny, but it really is like we take our own pieces and slices at our own ratios and flavors and ingredients that go into it for our own journey. And I'm interviewing a really special guest today, Dr. Tawny Kross, who is a chronic pain specialist. And if you are listening to this and you think you maybe don't have chronic pain, but instead you have chronic symptoms, this also applies to the symptoms as well. The same tools she talks about work for that as well. And it really is so important to understand that each slice of your pie is unique to you because your healing journey should be as beautiful and specific and personal as you are. So trust me when I say this, you are going to want to sit down, grab your notebook, grab a pen or a beautiful marker to start writing with because you are going to want to take some notes and make some tabs, and you're going to want to connect with her at the end because she has a great free gift as well. So this is loaded with goodies, so many great conversations around how this affects our productivity, how to get our life back and really expand our life and live in a way that feels so much better. We don't have to be stuck or weighed down or held back by any of these things, that it's simply just our body and biology. And Tani gets into all of that with us. So without further ado, let's go to the conversation. Today we have with us Dr. Tawny Kross, chronic pain specialist, founder of RSR, which stands for Ready, Set, Rewire, and is the creator of personalized approaches to help us move from living in this survival mode and just getting by to fully living our life and really thriving. She has experience working with veterans and a holistic healing practice. So I am super, super excited to have you on and really share with us kind of what you've been seeing in your journey and some of the wisdom that you've brought along the way. So, so glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
So we'll jump right in talking about the problem with overgeneralized solutions. So this is what I really liked when I first spoke to you about this, is that there's not really like a cookie cutter or one size fits all approach when it comes to healing chronic pain or any kind of chronic symptoms or illnesses that we're dealing with. And I think it's also very empowering. So I'd love to, hear more from you on, why that doesn't exactly work and what we can do instead.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons why I think it does not work. And the number one reason is just that everybody's life, like, you know how sometimes people say, like, you're not a special snowflake, but actually true. Like, nobody's
Yeah,
life is completely the same. And
yeah,
so when you go into any specific setting, whether it's in a clinical environment when you're seeing a provider or whether it's research, there's always going to be a little bit of variability. Like you'll find people like in research, will be like the outliers, the people that don't seem to fall into this little bubble that we're making. And truth be told, like if you look into the research itself, when they look at practical application rather than trying to like research control groups and the research like specifically picked out groups that look like A, B, C, or D, when they're trying to be more understanding of the diversification and the what do they call it? Heterogeneity of the human world. Like they see that people can't really fit in those bubbles. Um,
Mm.
so just from like a broad level standpoint, it doesn't make sense to approach anybody with like that same generalized perspective.
Right. Well, and like I know for me, I'm always like, oh, I'm that outlier. I'm that one out here. And it can feel very isolating. And I'm sure a lot of people relate to feeling that way. Whereas, like, it sounds like what you're saying is actually no, we all have our own unique path. And when you have a provider that also understands that, or a coach, or, someone that you're working with that really understands that, you're going to get so much further.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like I always like to say that when you go into any setting with a provider, you have the provider who's an expert on ABC, whatever they trained in, but there's
Hmm.
also a second expert in the room, and that's you. Like, because you're the only expert on your own life, the uniqueness of like what has occurred, what you think and feel. The both those expertises need to be brought to the table when it comes to collaborating on a good, healing, and successful plan.
Yes, I love what you said there. And I love this idea of like, you are your own expert on you
Hmm.
because no
Yeah.
one has been there from start to finish, or well, start to today, start to present moment, right? To understand all of the nuances and all the pieces that have come along with that. So I love
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
And we also talked about this like metaphor of a pie. And this is really funny because I don't even eat pie. I'm much more of like a cake person. I don't eat pie, but on a recent podcast interview, we were also using a pie analogy. So this just keeps coming up for me, but it just kind of fits. And so how we applied it, well, what we were talking about, kind of preparing and planning for this episode, is that our own healing journey is kind of like this pie, and there's all these, pieces of pie. Whereas like, you know, and I'll let you kind of explain it more, but all those pieces look different for each of us, and the ratio might be different, or the sizes of the different slices are different, and it might have different flavors and things like that. So how can we start to maybe apply that or overlay that to our own healing journeys?
Yeah, I feel like I just made a post about something similar today.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
well, like because I've been seeing a lot, you'll go on different websites and people are like, oh, it's your heal your trauma and you'll feel better.
Yeah.
Like heal your like work on your gut health and you'll feel better. And then the reality is like, well, like, there are many people need to work on their gut health, but like,
Yeah.
what if you're someone who eats pretty well, you are good about eating anti-inflammatory foods or whatever, and you don't need to work on that, right? Then maybe there's more of an emotional piece, or maybe there's more of a sleep thing, or maybe there's more stuff
Yeah.
on other ends that you haven't considered, and that's not going to look the same for everybody.
Totally. And it's so funny too because those types of posts that you're talking about are like so always like really, I don't want to say like triggering, but just they invoke some emotion in me because I'm always like, gosh, am I doing it wrong? Am I, and you start to get in your head, even though I've like done this work, I still start to question like, well, gosh, it seems like so many other people have it figured out and I'm still figuring it out. But that's just a good reminder that like you have to figure out your own journey, and it is a process. This is not like a 6 steps, in 6 days and then you feel perfect.
Yeah, no, and I know you use the pie analogy, but have you heard of the blind man and the elephant?
Mm-mm, no.
So I love this one because like if you just imagine like let's say there's like six different blind men and they're
Yeah.
all touching a different elephant part. Like with the person that's touching his its nose might say, "Oh, this is a snake," and then the person that's touching like
Mm.
the ear might say, "This is a kite." And I kind of see that in the same way that I see just people who treat pain or people who treat health. It's like they all have their own expertise, but they only see what they see based off of like
Mm,
their experience in the world of academia or whatever. And so when you are someone who like, oh my gosh, I'm a physical therapist and I'm absolutely convinced that it's like your posture, your core strength, while someone
yeah.
else is like chiropractor and they're like, no, 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 it's like your vertebrae. You got to make sure to manipulate the spine. I think we want to realize that everything you see maybe has a sliver of truth to it.
Yeah.
How much of that sliver is true for you, again, is going to be dependent on your unique life.
Yeah. Yeah. You can almost like filter each of those pieces through what you already know. And you can like take the new information, but then, look through it and be like, okay, this piece I want to, add to my pie and my recipe. And this piece over here, I know it doesn't work for me because of XYZ or, whatever the reason might be. And I'm going to set that aside. So I think that's also just really empowering to be able to like make that choice and decipher and own that expertise that we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then when we look at like, okay, we want to, we understand that that's the mindset we can have going into it. How do we look at our goals and like actually setting goals for ourselves in our healing journey, whether that's this chronic pain or chronic, other chronic symptoms or illnesses that we're dealing with? How can we approach those goals in a way that, maybe like aren't too big, but are still, enough to like actually go for what we want without, stepping back too far or settling or being like, well, I guess I'll just stay here then because that's all I can do. Like there's like this, I think, balance that we could maybe take.
Yeah, so what I do find with goal setting is it is helpful, although you are still bringing your own expertise to the table. It is helpful to have someone who bounces those ideas off of you because while we
Yeah.
are experts on our own selves, we are definitely not experts on our own blind spots.
Yes.
And some of our blind spots um, are what actually prevents us from being successful in goals. So
Yeah.
a rule of thumb I would say I like to use is number one, the goal needs to be action oriented
Hmm.
rather than outcome oriented. And outcome
Yeah.
oriented would be like, oh, I want to lose 20 pounds in like 6 months, right?
Yeah.
You're looking for an outcome, you're looking for a change. Now, everybody wants change, but the truth is, we don't have any control over outcomes. I have no control over weather. I have no control how much weight I lose.
Right.
I don't have control over if I'm alive the next day.
Yeah.
But I absolutely have control over my own actions. And so if we want to be successful, we want to start framing goals based off of the things that we are doing behaviorally. Those actions are going to be what will help us arrive at a more likelihood of reaching some specific outcome. Um, I also think people tend to make goals too big. And when we make goals too big, not only does it make it really hard to achieve those goals, our nervous systems also kind of want to shut down because it's just like if I told you tomorrow,
Mhm.
Lindsay, I want you to climb a mountain, you're gonna be like,
Yeah.
no. Your nervous
You're
system is
like,
like, no,
what?
absolutely not, protect.
Yeah.
Um, so what I always invite people when they work with me is to start with something small, like super duper achievable. There's no goal too small. An example of this was this woman was like, "Hey, I want to be able to what was she said? She wanted to make smoothies, eat smoothies every day." And it
Mm.
sounds reasonable. I'm like, "Oh yeah, that kind of sounds reasonable." She's like, "I've been working on this thing for an entire year and a half and I haven't done it once." And so that goal was actually too big for her. So we were looking at some of the barriers for her. So you want to start to ask yourself, all right, what are my barriers around goal setting? And the barrier might be, well, like it just feels like too impossible. It doesn't feel realistic. While for this specific woman, it was, well, I haven't even taken the blender out of the box, which was
Yeah.
so the goal might be as small as, you know what, just take the blender out of the box. Who cares if you make the smoothie? Just take the blender out of the box. And then if
Yeah.
once that happens, then you have one barrier removed and you have like a hit of dopamine, like I did this thing, and which encourages you to do the next thing. Um, I also would say that asking yourself the question, how confident am I about hitting this goal, is a really good one to
Mm.
kind of
Yeah.
self-reflect, especially if you don't have anybody to bounce off of. And
Yeah.
if your number is pretty high, let's say 7 or above, then chances are you're going to hit that goal. But if it's
Mm-hmm.
below a 7, then you want to reevaluate and be like, okay, well, like there's still something in this that it makes me want to do it. Like, what can I do to change that goal to make it a higher confidence level?
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. I know when I went through the whole process of like physical therapy and like graded movement in the program at the Mayo Clinic, just as one small example is like dumbbells. And so they were like, okay, so before one of my goals was like I wanted to get back into weightlifting. Like, what were you lifting before for dumbbells? And I'm like, okay, well, I had 25 to 35 pound dumbbells in each hand. And then they had me start with 3 pounds. And I was like, what are you talking about? And
Yeah.
I am literally like looking around the room, like, is anyone looking at me right now? Because I'm pretty sure they're going to judge me. And that, gradually over time increases. But it's like you're saying, like, sometimes you just have to get the blender out of the box and, do that first step, build the confidence. Because if you do that and then you like take the next step, okay, how do I feel? Like you're talking about the assessment of like, how am I feeling? Did I overdo, underdo? Like, do you have that self check-in? Take the next step and the next step. And then pretty soon over the long term, you're actually doing so much more than you would have if you had like tried to do too much and then crash.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point too, like when you were using the whole 3 pound dumbbell idea is
Yeah.
I think um realizing that your sense of where you think you quote should,
Yeah.
unquote be
Yeah.
relative to where you were trying to perform at whatever level you were before pain started can be a barrier, right? When you're not in
Yeah.
the space of acceptance, you're like no, like, and you're shaming yourself, you're guilting
Yeah.
yourself, you're feeling disappointed. That can definitely be something that interrupts your ability to complete a goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing around goals that really, I guess, was a big surprise for me going through that process was when you go in and you start working with like pain coaches and, doctors and pain clinics, they tell you that the goal can't be to get rid of the pain. And I was so upset about that because but over time it makes sense because you start to realize like, okay, if I make the goal to not have pain, first of all, now I'm focusing more on the pain. Second of all, if I have a difficult day, now my brain is signaling more anxiety and turning signals up because that pain, fear, pain cycle keeps going. And it's making things worse versus like, how can I make my goals about what I actually want my life to look like and getting your life back and like really living, kind of what, I said in your intro of like going from just surviving to like truly living your life again.
Yeah. I actually had someone comment on this the other day because, like, even though they had been in the pain journey for a really long time, it was still so hard to conceptualize, like, well, how can pain not, like, because you eventually you want that thing to happen. And
Yeah.
their specific worry was on, well, what if I'm increasing function and I'm just tolerating the pain better? And I said, that often happens is yes, you increase your quote tolerance for what it is you're feeling. And we also want to recognize that as your life gets bigger, just based off of the science behind what pain isn't just being tolerated better. It starts to get smaller, and this might come almost gradually and imperceptibly in the beginning.
Yeah.
And it does happen. It just in the beginning, you can't let like pain be the end goal.
Yes. Yes. I love kind of that, you know, trying to think how to say this. I love that approach because you're not saying it's not possible. You're just saying that can't be your initial focus because it can cause more maybe anxiety up front if you're not there yet. I know like I think it was on my like third session with my own pain coach and uh I was like, okay, so I get it. I understand it. It's coming from my brain. How do I just like turn it off? Why haven't I turned it off yet? She's like, breathe, relax. We're not there yet. Like so, that there's definitely like I think patience is a big
Yeah.
part of that.
Yeah. And I think to that, like the patience part being a thing, very important, obviously, because we don't know how long it might take. And the
Yeah.
other thing too is like when you're so in pain, I think it just becomes um the changes of pain it aren't really definable. It's not like a measurable thing, right? What is the
Right.
difference between a 2 and a 3, a 3 and a
Yeah.
4? Like I'm sure there's a difference between like a 10 and a 0, but like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what is that in between? Um I shared this story with the same person actually I was just talking about. So I work in a veterans hospital. I think you shared that at the beginning. But I had this veteran that worked with me, and he had pain in his shoulder for a really long time. And he came to see me, and he could not raise his arm. He could not play golf. He could not do anything. And like, I asked him like, what's your pain like? And he's like, oh, it's terrible. Um, and I noted down his quote intensity level of pain, but I didn't ask him very often what it was when we started working together. And by the end of 3 months, he was raising his arm. He was telling me that he was playing golf every day. And then I asked him how his pain was. He's like, oh, it's about the same, still terrible. And then which is funny because, and then I looked at him and I was like, what would you say your pain level is now? He's like, oh, like a 2. And then I showed him his pain level at the beginning. It was a 7. And
Wow.
I think, and he started laughing. He goes, actually it has been better. And then this, not to say it's always true for everybody, but I use the story to illustrate the fact that sometimes your pain simply being there can subjectively feel terrible, but if you really allowed yourself to see like the growth and the progress, like the experience of pain actually is smaller. You just don't know that difference. And so
Yeah.
like, how do you really want to eyeball pain all the time trying to see like, is it a 4? Is it a 3? Or do you
Right.
want to allow yourself to see that your life is growing and being different, and then eventually that pain just becomes smaller and smaller?
Yeah. I love that story. That's such a great share. Do you think there's a difference between like when someone has chronic pain in one area, like that example, like the shoulder or the arm, versus like the widespread, what they might call like fibromyalgia or neuroplastic pain, where it's kind of like throughout the whole body? Do you think that there's like more complexity to that where people are kind of unpacking that? Or do you think like, when looking at kind of the pie and you're looking at your goals of like, okay, I want to, be able to move this or do this thing over here. Do you think that brings in a lot more complexity than like targeting one area, or is the process pretty much the same?
That's a good question. And I would say overall, most chronic pain um, conditions, whether it has like fibromyalgia type presentation, which is all over the entire body, versus a very specific area like low back pain, or even let's say CPRS, like from in your hand or in your jaw, the approaches overall they're same. I would break it down to one, how are you able to soothe your nervous system? Like, and that usually starts with like pain neuroscience education, teaching you that like this hurts and is not harmful. And then once you soothe the nervous system, or you're working on soothing the nervous system rather, like how well can you address the reasons for why your nervous system sensitized in the first place? And this is where the complexity comes in. On the more simplistic level, it might just be purely fear conditioning. Because I've had people who
Mhm.
have had widespread pain, and as soon as they
Mm.
learned, you know what, it's actually not harming you, they're like, oh, and they make super quick progress. But then in
Yeah.
other instances, it might just be one specific area of pain. Let's say low back pain. I have someone that had a traumatic injury, and to the point that whenever they see reminders of their specific injury, their back pain triggers. And
Mm.
and those layers for this person was extremely complex. It was the trauma, it was also like shame and judgment and all this other stuff that kind of rolled into it. So even though it wasn't widespread pain, it was complex because there were layers to helping the nervous system wind down so that we could address and that we needed to address multiple layers of what the nervous system was concerned about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think like I don't know, you can tell me what you think, but from my perspective, it's been that soothing the nervous system and really teaching that how to calm down. And there's like so many complex ways to do that, right? Like from physical movement to, actual like actually physical therapy to, mental health therapy and everything in between.
I would say if you can figure out like the reason why your nervous system is anxious in the first place, then
Yeah.
the soothing becomes easier.
Right. Yeah. Because it's like when you start to work on like actually soothing your central nervous system, it feels like there's all these like little strings that connect to all these different things, right? And, for those who have chronic symptoms that maybe aren't pain, maybe it's, brain fog or, nausea or IBS or other kinds of, maybe like facial pain or pelvic floor pain, all these different things. It feels like to me that it's all kind of connected. And once you can start soothing, like you said, and I like what you said about like finding your reason why it might be unsettled or in kind of a hyper arousal or volume is turned up and it starts to
Mhm.
kind of trigger and affect all of these different areas that you might be struggling with.
Yeah, exactly.
So then when we look at our goals and we look at our pie, how do we, because that can feel overwhelming, right? Like when you first look at that and you first start to understand like, okay, what is my pie? What are the slices? What flavors do I want? What works for me? What do I enjoy? How do we start to break that down into more, simple, smaller, actionable, slices or ingredients for our recipe?
Yeah, in the coaching provider world, we use an acronym called SMART, which sounds super judgy and it's not meant to be at all. Like you need to make a smart goal, not a dumb goal. But like, no, it truly means like the acronym is like specific.
Yeah.
So specific um, would be like, I want to be able to um, be with my like hang out see my child more or like hang out with my child more, right? Versus a general goal like I want to feel more connected with
Mm-hmm.
people. Like which person, who, like what are you
Yeah.
doing here? And then it should be measurable. Like what exactly, like is it 30 minutes? Like what are you doing here? How many times a week? Um, where are you doing this thing? It should be achievable. So when you're looking at it, you're asking yourself that whole confidence interval, like, where am I? Like, does it feel like I can actually do this? My confidence level is 7 or above. It should be realistic and relevant. So if I were someone that could barely walk, do I really want to create a goal around running? I actually had a person I worked with one time. They're like, I want to get back into basketball. I'm like, oh, great. You really love basketball. They're like, no, I hate it. I'm like, why would you do that? Um, and then time bound, like by when would you like this achieved? And
Yeah.
then just in general, I want these goals for everybody to be flexible because like nobody's going to like 100% of the time hit something out of the park. And so I
Yeah.
would usually say if you hit your goal at least 50% of the way, like that is something you want to celebrate and like say that that's a good achievement.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you. And it's such a good reminder to like, find what works for you. And when it comes to our own productivity, it really is personal. And like understanding like what works for us isn't always what someone else is doing. Like the basketball person, maybe they saw someone else doing basketball and they're like, "Oh, they got back into it and they played basketball and that worked really well for them." But I don't like that. So it's like, how do we start to figure out how to like create our own mold and not try to fit into somebody else's and like really find our own rhythm for our life, our capabilities, current and future potential, and our interests, and maybe our location. If you want to be like a mountain climber and you live somewhere where it's all flatlands, you may need to move. Right? And so like all of these things to be considered into our productivity.
Yeah, you said something that like brought something up for me around um, the uh, the loss of self.
Yeah.
Because what I find happens for many people who've been, especially if you've been in pain for many, many years, is there's this loss of like who you are. And then you're
Yeah.
just like, I don't even know like what sparks my joy anymore. Like, what do I actually really want to do? And oftentimes on the end of productivity, these were ideas formulated by other people. It was like formed by the external world pressed on you. Like what it means to be productive is 20 hours of the day you are doing stuff for other people, and then 4 hours you're sleeping to or whatever.
Yeah.
And like we want to realize that some of the goals we set might not be driven from a space of like your core authentic self, or it's not your true value,
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if you had a question there, but I think that's important to bring up. It's just that sometimes goal setting can be hard because you are not sure like what authentically you really want to do for yourself. Especially if you happen to be a people pleaser and you've been used to like, formulating goals around other people, meeting other people's expectations. And then that's same thing for productivity. Like, is that productivity based off of what you feel is something that brings you joy? And is good for you and aligned with your health, or is it productivity because you just want to feel busy, or you like feel like you want to achieve based off um, somebody else's ideas?
Right. Yeah. Or like where we used to be. I know that's a
Mm.
big one of like comparing ourselves to what we could once do, kind of mentioned it a little bit before, but it's like, oh, I should be lifting that 25, 35-pound dumbbell because that's what I did in the past. And, maybe I could still do it, but then I'm going to crash. So that's really me overdoing and then crashing. And over the long run, I'm not actually getting anywhere. I'm not actually reaching my goals.
Right. Exactly.
So as we look at kind of that process and that journey, I know there's something called pacing, and I'll let you kind of get into that and explain that a little bit more. But how can we start to apply that, and why is that so essential for truly sustainable progress on this journey?
Yeah. Well, pacing is, in my opinion, something that is not just applicable for people with chronic pain. Pacing
Mhm.
actually needs to happen in
Yeah.
anybody's daily life, whether you have chronic pain or you don't. And part of that comes from just the fact that like nothing changes overnight. No matter how hard you apply yourself or how quickly you do something, your nervous system just needs time to be able to adapt and change. And we want to recognize and respect the fact that your body can only do so much. And your nervous system needs that sweet patience, time, etc., to adjust. Um, and then pacing itself, I think people can often get that misconstrued with doing the same thing but slower. And
Mhm.
I really want to emphasize that that's not the case. Like, yes, you could say that, and that's true for, let's say, runners, right? If you're a runner, pacing like slower, your pace changes. But most of the time, pacing is about scheduling breaks. It is planning and making sure that you're having this on-off cycle. So your body actually is cycling through some work and then some rest and recovery, some work, some rest and recovery. Um, and the reason why this is important is because your body's designed for rest just as much as it's designed for being able to help you move and do things. And because we do need that time to adjust, you want to be able to gently expand, like just challenge your natural borders a little bit. And I emphasize a little bit because some people were like, oh, okay, like I got to feel this in order for me to be like doing something. Um, and then respecting the amount of time you might need to recover. Um, and an example of, let's say, non-chronic pain pacing would be like when you go to the gym and you weightlift, you do sets and reps, right? And in those repetitions and sets, you take breaks, right? You don't do a set of 1,000 squats. You do like 3 sets of 8, and then you have a rest period in between those sets. And it's usually maybe it's a minute and a minute and a half. And the reason why you do that is because your muscles need time to reset. And with a sensitized nervous system, you want to realize that not only does that sets and reps theory apply to everything you're doing, including walking, general physical activity, but that if your nervous system is sensitized, which it often is with chronic pain, your rest breaks need to be a little bit longer. And your actual time in working might need to be a little bit smaller. And then over time, you will see those numbers change. Your body will adapt and those rest times can shrink. Hopefully not so that it's never there, because again,
Yeah.
we want to make sure that our bodies are always cycling through some period of rest and recovery just as much as we want it to be moving.
Absolutely. I think one of the best ways it was explained to me, like in one sentence, was like the way you can do something in a way. So the example they were using was like a runner. So like it's the pace and breaks and rests that you take in which allow you to make it to the finish line that you want to reach. So
Hmm.
it's like if, you know, like weights or running or whatever, if you're just going full speed all the way to the end, are you going to burn out halfway? Are you going to like feel terrible afterwards and not be able to run again? Like what is that amount that you need to build in so that it's
Mhm.
sustainable, so that you can actually go long term?
Yeah. Yeah, I love the running one. I usually use the example of a marathon runner because
Hmm.
I'm sure people who run already know this, but
Yeah.
for people who don't, most marathon, in fact, all marathon training programs I've ever seen have been like let's say week one, you're doing like 3 miles, like day one, and then the next day you're doing 6 miles, and then you go back to four, and you're kind of going up and down and bouncing between these lower and higher numbers. And then on a long run, you start with something like 9 or 10 miles, and then you build upwards. When you build upwards, maximum, they usually don't want you to run more than 20 miles. Some programs may have you running 22, but they don't actually have you running 26.2 until the race day. And even the week before the race, you're actually
Mm.
tapering down. You're at like 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles, or maybe not even like that. And then day of the race, then you push, you do the overdo. But because you've been adapting and training your body in a really nice
Yeah.
paced way, your system can do that and it doesn't pay for it or feel as bad.
Right. Yeah. And in that case, you're doing it once. That's kind of like the championship, right? And then you're
Mhm.
not then trying to do that every day or thinking that
Right,
that's possible.
right, exactly. And then just I think that's also a great example too, because as I mentioned before, everybody needs to pace, whether you're someone who has chronic pain or doesn't. It just your zone of how much you can do might look a little different.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard it one time said like everybody really needs this, but it's the people with chronic pain who can't get away with not doing it because eventually we're like, okay, I need help. Something's not working.
Right, exactly. That's
But other
perfect.
people, push through until maybe they can't, I guess.
Yeah.
So there's always this, these phrases out there too, like pushing through or mind over matter. Why do those often fail or not really work? And in the sense of like, let's say we'll just stick with like the running analogy of like, oh, I just want to, get out there and just run a marathon today, even though I haven't been training, or I've ran a couple times, so I'm sure I can do it. I can mind over matter it.
Yeah. So mind over matter, like I really would, I like to respect the fact that the mind is incredibly powerful. We don't
Oh
want
yeah.
to forget the fact that the mind is powerful. And we also don't want to forget that the mind is connected to the body.
Yeah.
And your body and your nervous system and your mind have a breaking point. So when you operate by a mind over matter mentality, oftentimes what is happening is you're ignoring your body's signals and you're creating further mind body disconnection. So where your body's saying, actually, that's enough, your mind is saying, no, keep going. And you're actually
Yeah.
pushing way too much beyond your borders. And while that's important in certain scenarios, like, saving a baby on oncoming
Yeah.
traffic, like,
Yeah.
you're having heroic feats, you're in big survival, like fight flight situations. Your system's designed like that so it can do incredible things in incredibly dangerous situations. It's the mind over matter mentality is not meant for daily life. And
Yes. I love
when you
that.
do that persistently for, like
Yeah.
95% of your life, you're going to create this huge gap between what your body can feel comfortable doing and what your mind is yelling at it to do the whole time. Um, so the problem with pushing through pain and mind over matter is just that you're really disrespecting the rest cycles, the recovery cycles, and what is actually possible on a daily life, what's sustainable. And then the other thing too is I like to point out like 5% of what you know is happening is conscious. Like that's the percent of your brain. I'm gonna say that better one more time. Your conscious brain is 5% of your brain. Like 95% of what your brain is doing is subconscious. So if you think you can bully your body into doing things or you can like, mind over matter things, it's just not true. Like 95% of those things are not available to you. Um, and so we want to respect the fact that that is also happening.
Yeah. And I think that's why like the pacing piece is so important because you're actually like viscerally training and communicating with your brain that you are safe. Like you were saying before, like, oh, you're actually, not in danger with this pain. You're actually structurally sound.
Mhm.
We just need to do some, reprocessing, right? And relearning of some things. And so understanding that I think is really important too.
Yeah, for sure. And what that also leads into is um, when you have this mind over matter mentality, you can often believe that when something's not working, it's your fault.
Yeah.
And if we acknowledge that 5% of your brain is that conscious like effort, what you're actually aware of, like the truth is it's not your fault. Like your nervous system is doing so
Yeah.
many things that you're not aware of. And we want to realize that you can't just brain retrain your way through things. You can't just say, oh, I don't have pain, and all of a sudden leave magical poof, like you don't
Yeah.
have pain. We want to realize it's not your fault. Your nervous system is doing something. And if you want to work on healing, can you use that 5% of your brain to and bring in the subconscious pieces to awareness to evaluate what your system's actually worried about rather than seeing that pain is this scary thing that you should not be feeling.
And I know sometimes trauma can be a part of that, whether that's, physical trauma or emotional trauma. How does that kind of weave in for us?
Yeah. So the nervous system, I like to tell people that it's always asking one main question. Is this thing threatening or am I able to relax? And threatening information can be, oh my gosh, is like do I have a tear? But threatening information
Mm,
can also be, I'm typing in an email and I'm getting nervous because I think my boss is gonna fire me if I say A, B, C, or D. That's threatening, right? My system starts to become more vigilant.
yeah.
If someone jumps out of a door and goes boo, like, again, that's like threatening information to me. Like my system's becoming vigilant. So I'm asking myself, like, if I were to bring things on a conscious level, like my nervous system is like, is this scary? Is this dangerous? Do I need to protect you from it? And physical trauma can be one of those things, obviously, that's threatening, but so is emotional trauma.
Yeah.
Many people with trauma, for instance, will say that they know physically they're here in the present moment, but their body and nervous system feel like they're still actually reacting. They feel stuck as if
Yeah.
the thing's still happening, and that's because the body doesn't know time. It doesn't know past or present. It knows that something scary happened, and it might still be wound up because of that. So being able to help your system get off of vigilance, get off of this like everything is threatening kind of state involves some effort. And sometimes trauma is one of those things, but not necessarily, because we often have people who like have trauma and can move their bodies and minds forward in timeline so that the trauma is not keeping them stuck in the past. But if you happen to be one of those people where you're like, oh my gosh, I do feel like I'm still triggered by things in the past, then that just means that maybe that is a bigger piece of the pie that you might want to work on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned the term a couple of times, like when we're sensitized or our nervous system is sensitized. So I also want to give you a moment to kind of explain that and maybe talk about that, that central sensitization and what that is if people don't know.
Yeah, so your nervous system is designed to sense things. It can sense things from viruses to a tear in your muscle to weather. Um, But with people with chronic pain, and it can begin whether there's injury or not. Sometimes it can become out of nowhere. Like you'll often hear people say stuff like, I don't know, like just gradually came in. I started to have more pain. What's happening, generally speaking, is that your nervous system, whatever level of sensing it had before, is
Mhm.
now starting to wind up. Sometimes we equate it with like, let's say a smoke alarm. If my smoke alarm rings. Sometimes it rings if there's fire. But for a sensitized smoke alarm, if I'm taking a hot shower and the steam hits the smoke alarm just so, my smoke alarm will ring, even though there's no fire. And that's kind of what's happening with a sensitized nervous system is your nerves are going, wait, weather changes? Is that dangerous? I don't know. And then it'll like fire off. So that's, I hope that makes a little bit clear for people who are not quite certain what sensitization means.
It does. And I was actually given an analogy recently that I really liked. It's kind of like if you're driving and it's like a beautiful sunny day and the roads are safe and you don't really have to think about anything. Maybe like a car will come by and, swerve into your lane or something. And for a moment, you might be vigilant, but then you'll calm down and you'll continue driving. But if you're driving in a blizzard, and the whole time you're just like right up to the wheel and you're trying to see and you don't have much visibility and it's just like your muscles are super tense and you're just like super hyper vigilant for the whole drive. And a lot of times it's a very long drive then too, because you have to drive super slow. And that sense of like, oh, I'm constantly looking for danger. Is the car going to slip? Is there a patch of ice? Is there another car, right? But then if you take that approach to the sunny day, that's kind of what that feels like.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So if we were to come into your office or virtual or in person, and we have chronic pain or some type of trauma recovery that we need help with. I know that no single formula works for everybody. Well, what would be the first thing that you'd maybe like walk us through, or how would you start to like empower us, and what would you equip us with on that first day to start thinking about how to put that pie together for ourselves?
Yeah, I like this question because it's true. Like sometimes you do need to have a nuanced approach with how you explain it. But generally speaking, what I would say is if you're someone that is coming into my office, chances are it's because your system has been sensitized and you might have had many, many, many years of experience where doctors told you differently. They're like, okay, it's, this tear, it's your herniated disc, it's your like degenerative disc disease. So usually it begins with helping you understand, yes, you might have those things or you might look like ABC in the inside. And it doesn't mean that your body's broken. What we want to start to look at is that you're a whole person. You're a complex human being. You're not just a knee or a shoulder. And I'll bet, for example, if you were to come into my office, Lindsay, it was your first time, I would say something like, like, have you ever noticed that like sleep seems to, like, poor sleep makes your body feel yucky or worse? Or like if you
Yeah.
didn't eat very well, you feel like your body can't perform as well.
Mhm.
Like when you're angry or moody, it seems like it makes like your physical performance a little off or different. And this is just an example of like how complex your body is. And when it comes to looking at pain, we don't want to just look at like a simple body part. We want to look at like these little areas that seem to be impacting you physically, whether it's by pain or other things. And I'll bet that you have some things that pop into mind, like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, these areas have been bothersome. Stress can be one of them. So the question is like what you feel like might be the biggest slice of the pie, if you will, for Lindsay, biggest slice of the pie that you feel like is glaring at you, like, oh my gosh, this is a huge thing that I really want to take a look at. And then we would start there just by getting your expertise on like what might be playing a huge part in weighing down and loading down your system.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so good to just know that like our body has learned certain things through their experiences. So it's like, of course that happened. And, now it also has its own ability to heal itself when we give it the right ingredients. So what are some of the tools or, mediums that you use with your clients?
Oh gosh. So movement is definitely a big one because
Mm.
usually people who have pain are they're afraid of moving in a way that would aggravate them. So showing them,
Yeah.
I would say mindful movement or ways to
Mhm.
actually lean into the movement so that it doesn't feel so scary and then
Yeah.
expand and build resilience on that. I would also say looking at emotions is a big one
Mm.
because, well, one, emotions are so tied, emotional pain pathways are so tied to our physical pain. So some of the tools I would use to look at that is growing your skill set in mindful awareness, looking into I guess you can it's not necessarily a mindful awareness thing or trying to help with emotions, but using breath work for grounding, using breath work to help your nervous system feel safe would be another. Those are some beginning steps I would say are easy.
Yeah, I love the breathwork one. And I know that one can feel a little bit intimidating to some people who haven't maybe worked with that. I remember hearing one woman say like for example, like diaphragmatic breathing and like she's like, oh, but my stomach just doesn't move. Like I can't move my stomach, so it can sometimes feel a little bit more challenging when that is brand new to you. But I think it's probably one of my favorites
Mhm.
personally, just because it's portable. You can take it anywhere. Well, really mindfulness is too, but it's not
Mhm.
like your whole, gym or PT routine or whatever can't always come with you, but like your breath is always right there in your body, and it's with you in the car, on the airplane, in a intimidating meeting, in bed at night, it's always there with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to what you were just saying, sometimes it can also be intimidating because people might be triggered with breath work. So if that happens to whoever's listening to this, don't be surprised. Sometimes it does become triggering, especially if you have had trauma looped in with something you were doing breathing wise. So sometimes that takes a little bit of growth and a little bit of effort. Oh, and then like one more tool you just reminded me of was like just brain retraining, right? Like being aware of
Hmm.
your thoughts,
Yeah,
because we can shift our thoughts. We don't have to be married to them or believe that every thought we have is true.
absolutely. And I just love that it's all of this, especially if it's the first time hearing this kind of thing, it's so validating because like, okay, it might be coming from my brain, which is in my head, but it's not in my head in the sense that I made it up or it's an imaginary, right? It's just a bodily response. It's okay, it's safe, it's normal, and there's options. There's something we can do to feel better, to enjoy our life more. And I just love that you have walked us through this in such a beautiful way, and just very tactical, and also like a very safe way of like, if that doesn't work for you, that's okay. And like finding your own approach is just, absolutely beautiful. So for those of us listening to this episode, what would you say the first thing is that you would want them to go do after hearing this, whether this is new information or they're just continuing down the research path on how to get more help, or the one thing that you kind of want them to take away and you make sure, like, if you get nothing else from this, I want you to know or go do this.
If you get nothing else from this, just I would say number one, remember that your pain is real, right? No matter like how it started and what might be driving it to increase or decrease, you're absolutely feeling pain. And then two, um, I would ask yourselves, what do I know, like like makes me feel somehow threatened emotionally? Like what is a consistent theme? And then three, like
Yeah.
just practice like some breath work. Just see how it feels. Try it on. If you want to, you can pair it with movement, especially if it's a movement that you find scary. But usually, if you're slowing down your breath, that slower breath allows your body to feel safer. And if you pair it with movement, what you're doing is you're teaching your system to uncouple something that might be scary. Because in the past, if you moved a certain way, you moved too quickly. It felt a little bit too outside of your comfort zone and it gave you some pain. But if you paired that with slower breath work, you might find that makes a difference.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much. This has been such a gift and just an absolute pleasure for me to talk to you and also to just share this with everybody. So, for those listening who want to get in touch with you or grab the free gift that you have, where can they find that?
Direct message me on Instagram, message me like mind body, and I'll send you my mind body awareness meditation.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And we'll have all of that linked below. And Tawny, thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing this with us, because I know that it's super important and I believe in what you're doing so much that I think anyone struggling with this is such a great place to start. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for braving the inside of your mind with me. The better we understand ourselves, the more deeply we understand the world, and as our awareness grows, life just gets better and better. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a review and share this with anyone else you think could benefit from listening. A quick reminder that the content shared in this podcast is for informational purposes only. I am not a licensed therapist, and the discussions here are not a substitute for professional advice. If you're dealing with a specific issue or need personalized guidance, please consult with a qualified professional. Your well-being is important, and this podcast is simply a platform for sharing insights and experiences. I appreciate you spending this time with me. Until next time.